Please note, we would like to make it very clear, we are totally against the form of discipline described in the articles and accounts being used on minors and non-consenting adults. Although some of these accounts are fictional, and others may be an exaggerated reality, none of them are too far from the truth of what really happened back in those days. If you are enjoying our stories, please do subscribe to this channel. We will be posting many more stories as time goes by.
My memorable day in the mall. It was one of these days. I, Nathan, who was visiting the mall with his mother, was bored to death and Mom seemed to go on forever, leading us from store to store. Suddenly my mother took us into the clothing department because she had just seen a nice dress for me. Once inside the store, I suddenly felt that I couldn't take this torture anymore. It was time to protest. I told Mum that I wanted to go home and that I refused to try any clothes today. Although this was quite some years ago. I lived in a middle-class white family where raising kids was done in a liberal fashion. Protesting wildly was normally free from risk, especially for us older ones. Mum and Dad seemed to be more strict with the younger ones who from time to time got their bottoms smacked when crossing the line. But today was the day when such matters would be way different. Well, Mummy said, I'd guess we'll buy you new clothes another day. Mum then continued to the next store, but I decided to end this shopping tour by continuing my protests. I want to go home now. I screamed and I was putting on my brattiest behavior possible. Everybody around looked at us and it must have been a great shame for Mum, who remained silent, continued to the next store, and the next, with me continuing complaining and screaming at her for the whole mall to hear. When inside the tea shop, suddenly my senses burst, and from my lips came words that I immediately regretted saying, I will never follow you out shopping again, you old bitch. I don't know why I said it, but I did, didn't I? Furthermore, for the entire store full of say 14 to 15 customers, to hear. Mom stopped what she was doing and nailed her eyes into me. What did you say? Nothing, I whispered, my face turning beet red. Several customers in the shop came to my mother's support and most of them looked very angry. One lady in the 50s also nailed me with her eyes and said, you are the worst kid I ever saw. If you were my boy I would have made completely sure you'd never say anything like that again. Another very angry-looking black lady, accompanied by her smirky-faced daughter 1 or 2 years younger than me, said something that made butterflies fly around my stomach. If you were my kid, I would have spanked your bare bottom right here and now. A man in the same age said to my mother, you shouldn't accept such words from your kid. I think he should be given a lesson right away. My mother just stood there with her head down looking sad, and for one moment I forgot about my own predicament and felt sorry for her. My thoughts, however, were rapidly going back to my own situation, since I heard humming voices around me saying words like punished, astonishing, outrageous, his bottom smacked. I knew something was going to happen and I feared the worst. Suddenly I was ripped from my thoughts when I felt my ear getting twisted and I was being dragged a few meters away. It was my mother dragging me. It seemed she had suddenly got new powers from somewhere. Ow, Mom, it hurts, I whined, and then Mom reached for a chair and sat down on it with me in front of her. Then she started to give me the lecture of my young life, containing sentences like how dare you call me something like that, don't you have the least shame, finishing off with I will make sure you'll never insult me in public again, young man. Because you are going to get the spanking of your life right here and now. My heart dropped. I stammered something like I'm too old, it was actually 2 years since my last spanking, please don't do it, I'm sorry. In the meantime, more people had gathered and I guess 20 to 25 people were standing watching my predicament. Making my worst fears come true, 1 boy and 2 girls from my class were there too. Mom bent me down over her knee and continued lecturing me for a minute. Then she started to lay down hand spanks on my jeans-clad bottom. Smark, 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 I was lying there silently crying, mostly from the shame. Mom was spanking me in front of so many people, and I guess half of them were children. Suddenly Mom raised me and wiped a tear from my face, saying save your tears my boy, because you'll need them in a minute or two. I'm going to make completely sure you'll never ever defy me in public again, do you understand? I just fell into tears and louder crying. I was again put over Mommy's knee and the spanks started to rain down. It stung like mad and I started begging her to stop. Smark, Smark, please Mom. Smark, 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 stop it, I promise to be good. Smark, Smark. After 1 or 2 minutes of spanking, I was risen up again and I felt Mother's eyes right through me. Never ever will you call me things like that again. Do you hear me? Still 20 to 25 people were gathered, at least half of them were there from the start, knowing the reason for my punishment, adults still looking angry but also satisfied to seeing me get what I deserved, kids having that special satisfied smirk upon their faces, but also 2 girls actually looking sorry for me. It was then. Being spanked bottom in public is probably every kid's worst nightmare, but for me it was even worse. I felt Mom's hand resting on my bare bottom for a second, followed by a rapid rain of hard and imprinting hand spanks on my cheeks. Smark, quit it you, Smark, Smark, you have no right, Smark, Smark, Arga, Smark, Smark. If I'd screamed and kicked like crazy before, I for sure didn't do it with less enthusiasm now. My screams turned from mad and angry into more and more getting the character of begging and apologizing again. Smark, Smark, I promise to be good. Smark, Smark, please Mom, it stings so bad. Smark, Smark, I'll never do it again, Smark, wah, Smark. My bottom stung like crazy and Mom kept on for several minutes, meanwhile giving me short lectures about how to behave in public. Suddenly a short pause and then I felt the smacks continuing, but now with a hairbrush. It stung so much and I was doing a crazy dance on my mommy's knee, trying to make my buttocks smaller and getting away from the spanks, but of course to no avail. The hairbrush found its twin little round targets again and again and again. Finally the spanking was over. I think it lasted for 10 minutes and I was lying helplessly over my mother's knee, with my well-whipped bottom on full display. I didn't even protest, but just sobbed uncontrollably when Mom stood me up naked from waist down, made me step out of my trousers and underpants and made me go around and apologize for everyone in the crowd who witnessed my behavior and its consequences. Coming home, I was sent to bed without supper, and I was almost immediately falling into a sleep in the early evening hour. But before sleeping, I watched my bottom in the mirror. It was a sorry sight. Red and sore all over and even a few places where the skin was almost broken. My birthmark was also in a different color now, the previously dark brown area had got a vivid and angry red-brownish tone. I fell asleep on my tummy that night. The first day at school was a nightmare. My predicament in the mall was on everyone's tongues and I was tortured that day with questions and talk about what had happened. Also the following weeks, the other kids' attitudes towards me was very bad, and I cried myself to sleep during the evenings. I lost my friends, except my best friend Stephen. I realized that I was marked forever. After 2 months came news that were very welcome. Daddy had got a new job in another town far away from this town, where we had lived just 1.5 years. So within 2 weeks from that, we moved and I changed school. I got new friends immediately and do I have to say had no one ever got to know about what had happened that day in the mall in my previous hometown. Another thing that I shouldn't have to say, is that my attitude towards my parents dramatically improved after that incident.